In a previous video, I finished the electronics for my homebrew telescope GPS unit. That project was on the list of tasks I had to finish before I was allowed to jump down the 3D printing rabbit hole. This gave me a month of printing practice before I got around to making the case for this project. One of the key design constraints that I had to get to grips with is that the printer cannot form large overhangs. My approach is to split my enclosure and internal supports into multiple pieces which can each be bolted together. The only overhangs in this design are at the bottom of the bolt holes, where the neatness is not an issue provided the structure is solid. The electronics for this project involves 6 interconnected boards, so first I made a cassette for the electronics. Working backwards from the screen window, there are 3 parallel boards and some spacers, all stacked along 4 25mm machine screws. Then, working orthogonally from the side of the screen, I've used 2 halves to clamshell the electronic cassette and the antennae. To align the 2 halves, I've added collars around the bolt holes and small lips along the longer seams. I've also added stiffening ribs to the front faces surrounding the screen. You have to particularly enjoy this beautiful rendering, because it took my poor laptop 18 hours to complete it. I hadn't expected it to take quite so long, but once it had been running for a full 6 hours, I figured it was best just to leave it to finish. The enclosure bolts together snugly. It doesn't need to be weathertight, as the telescope needs to be kept as out of the weather as is practical. The enclosure is pretty much as small as the contents will allow. I would have liked it to be smaller, but the limiting factor is the point-to-point wiring I'm using. I may have to start looking at custom circuit boards if I want to miniaturise these projects any further. Also, the recesses and thin walls for the bolts need a surprising amount of volume, although I work the wiring around these, which is why they're not more conventionally placed in the corners. This project has taken a number of iterations, and I've ruined quite a number of bits of hardware in the process. Not counting the 3D printer, I've probably now spent enough repeatedly buying parts to equal the outrageous cost of the commercial unit. But I like to hope I learnt a few things along the way. In this view, you can see the unwieldy optical train at the back of the telescope, which I think is ripe for a future modification. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.